All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome, everyone, to Master Negotiators Live, which is your essential guide to the art and the science of negotiation. I am your host, Jean-Nicolas Reyt, but you can call me JN. I am an associate professor of management at McGill University, where I specialize in negotiation and conflict management. So, what can you expect from Master Negotiators Live? Every week, I bring in two negotiation experts or master negotiators, and they not only have a wealth of experience, but also fascinating stories to share. So this live stream is a melting pot where various negotiation communities can meet and discuss. We have people from sales, procurement, management, mediation, arbitration, and even law enforcement. My mission is to arm you with practical insights so you can improve your negotiation skills. If you have not done so already, please sign up for my newsletter. I'll put a link up there once I've introduced the guests. I send weekly invitations to my stream and my negotiation resources. So let's get the show started. My first guest is Suzanne de Janasz. She's not only a professor and a consultant, but also a keynote speaker and an author. She has written some great pieces for the Harvard Business Review. Suzanne is an expert in leadership, in mentoring, change, career development, negotiation, and balancing work life. So let me introduce Suzanne. Hello, Suzanne.
Greetings.
Greetings. So, Suzanne, to get us started, what's your number one negotiation tip?
There are a lot, but I think the one that comes to mind is have a really clear understanding of your goal. And of course, once you can do that, try to think about how the other person with whom you're negotiating may also connect with that. Can I give a really quick story of how I had an MBA student years ago who walked into my office during office hours and said, I need some help. It's past time. I'm supposed to get this raise, et cetera, et cetera. I said, okay, quick role play. And so, hi, Jeanette, how are you doing? And she goes, hi, I want to talk to you about a raise. And I said, oh, okay. Well, what are you looking for? And she said, more. Yeah. More? How much more? More what? I mean, it was astounding to me that something so clear to me was absolutely amorphous to her. So there's more to that story, but it just really surprised me at how you can walk into a negotiation and not really know what you want, which creates all sorts of problems for you later on, which I'm sure we'll get to in this podcast.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Suzanne. Our second guest for this week is Moshe Cohen. He's been teaching negotiation since 1996 and mediating since 1995. His book, Collywobbles, How to Negotiate When Negotiation Makes You Nervous, is a must-read. He teaches at Boston University in the Questrom School of Business, and he covers negotiation, mediation, leadership, and organizational behavior. Hello, Moshe. How are you doing?
Hi, Jan. Good. And
Nice.
Hi, Suzanne. Thank you.
Nice having you. So, Moshe, what's your number one negotiation tip?
So like Suzanne, it's really hard to restrain myself to just one. But if I have to give just one, is slow down. Negotiations are highly emotional, and we tend to get reactive. We get reactive to our thoughts, our feelings, what the other side is doing. And when we get reactive, our ability to access our skills and our ability to access the information we prepared goes way down, and we need to slow down so we can respond rather than react in the moment.
Excellent. So first, before we start, do you guys know each other?
No, well, as of a couple minutes ago.
Building bridges, right? Okay, perfect. So let me start, Moshe, with a very simple question, which is, why does negotiation make people nervous?
So it makes people nervous for a lot of reasons. One is because negotiations are often consequential. If you're negotiating, let's say, for your salary, that has implications not just to where you can live and what you can buy, but also to how you feel about yourself, how other people see you at work, how you feel about yourself at work. So they're consequential. And I think that a lot of people, even though we negotiate all day, every day, right? Because negotiations happen anytime you and someone else need to make a decision and you don't start off in the same place. When we think of those bigger negotiations, we often don't think of them as something we do very frequently. right? So for example, I drive my cars into the ground. I negotiate for cars every 5 to 10 years. I don't negotiate that very often. So I feel like a serial novice every time I go into that. And when you're feeling like a serial novice, you feel like the other person is in a position to take advantage of you. So, I think there's a number of reasons where we think that we're vulnerable when we're negotiating, and when we feel vulnerable, that makes us nervous.
So it's really interesting about the serial novice. It's the first time I hear that. But in addition to being a serial novice, we actually never get any feedback on how well we performed. So if you buy a car and you get a deal, you're going home thinking like, I don't know, like, is it a good deal? I'm not sure. And actually, a lot of people are nervous about that. That they realize suddenly that they didn't get a good deal. So yeah, I mean, absolutely. And so I think it's a really good segue actually, because Suzanne, you have an HBR piece about identifying opportunities, right? Like we have more opportunities than we think in organizations. So do you have examples of things that people miss out?
You were reading my mind, JN. So, Moshe, like you, I've been teaching negotiation for a lot of years. And in my orbit, we all talk about the importance of preparation. That's where you begin, right? We need to gather some data, look at the trends, know what you're worth, those kinds of things. Or in the case of cars, right? Look at the Kelley Blue Book or something like that. My argument is that's already 2 steps too late, because every day, as you said, Moshe, there are these opportunities that we don't even notice, right? So let's say, for example, you have a neighbor who has a fruit tree whose fruit dumps into your backyard. On the one hand, that's great, nice to have free fruit. But if you're not out there cleaning it regularly, the rats and other critters are, you don't want to see them in your backyard. And when I use that example in a classroom setting, people are like, yeah, I don't want to talk to my neighbor. Well, that's an opportunity to have a conversation. I don't know about you, but almost all of my bills come electronically and I don't look at them. I mean, thankfully, I've got money in the bank and those bills just automatically get paid. But what happens when you open up your account and go, wow, my cable bill just went up 30%. They didn't tell me. So those are 2 very simple, even non-work examples where is there an opportunity to get a better deal, a more fair allocation of chores? I mean, look at COVID. The Great Resignation was oversubscribed, if you will. The data are pretty clear on women. And so if things changed, but nothing changed in the household, and women were trying to juggle full-time work with full-time childcare, with full-time teaching their kids, since, them learning online as 12-year-olds wasn't really working. If you don't have that opportunity, if you don't take that opportunity to see if there's a better way to, again, fairer allocation, better deal, faster internet, those opportunities unnoticed become not only a poor ordeal for you, but also, as Moshe said, if you are not every day engaging in those sorts of opportunities, I call it negotiation muscle, starts to atrophy. So to prevent being that novice, looking for those opportunities and then preparing for and engaging in those opportunities can really help a lot.
That's a really, really good point. And I think, I'm really glad that we're all 3 of us today, because we're all from management. And I think, a lot of times negotiation trainers come from sales or procurement or law enforcement. And a lot of times, and this might be a generalization, you can tell me if it is, but I feel like they kind of self-selected into negotiation because they enjoy, the conflict management and negotiation. But most people, and that's like something that people are typically not aware of, but I would say like 80% of the people on this planet have issues managing conflicts. It's really something that's very, very difficult. If you look, by the way, in the percentage of people who negotiate their salary, which would be the number 1 negotiation you should make, right? If there is one thing that you should negotiate, it's how much people pay you. And it's around 80%. And I looked in Canada and the US, around 80% of people don't negotiate. They just accept the first offer And instead of, asking for more, they just switch jobs, right? They quit and they go somewhere else. So Suzanne, you have a specialty which is also on gender, and it's actually a really interesting topic because a lot, I would say, like a huge amount of research, a huge portion of the research on negotiation is about gender. So what are some difficulties that women, specifically women, encounter at the negotiation table?
Well, part of this comes back to how girls are socialized in Western culture, somewhat in Eastern culture as well. But this idea that girls are supposed to be nice and team players, not be aggressive, not, make it about themselves. And so they often lose out. In fact, a quick story, I was doing a workshop for a group of 100 high school girls because I realized girls become women. We got to change this narrative sooner. And this one young girl, after the session, the experiential exercises, etc., she asks me for my advice. And she says, last weekend, I babysat for a family and they forgot to pay me. Now, honestly, I'm thinking it was probably an oversight. Mom thought dad paid, dad thought mom paid. I'm hoping that's all it was. But then she continued and it blew my mind. She said, I really want to call them and ask for the money they owe me, but I'm afraid if I do call, they won't like me and they won't have me back. Sit on that for a moment.
Yeah.
And now take that 17-year-old girl, add, 20 years, not knowing what she's worth, not standing up for her value, and thinking that somehow asking for being paid for what the work she did would cause other people to dislike her. And the data are pretty clear about this, that women who do act in assertive ways are often experiencing backlash. Oh, well, now you're a B word, right? Or, yeah. Wow, who are you to ask for that? And the same behavior. In fact, I asked this group of high school girls too. I said, this conversation we're having, if instead of all girls in this auditorium, it were all boys, do you think the conversation would be the same? And immediately they're like, no, of course not. Boys wouldn't hesitate a moment. Of course, this is a stereotype and not all men and not all women fall into those categories. But so the number one thing, JN, is that because women are socialized in ways that are kind of counter to putting yourself out there, asking for what you want, and being assertive about that, a lot of women either don't do it or they do it, get that, touch the stove, get burned, and don't do it again. And so it does matter how you ask, and maybe we'll have time to talk about that later.
No, that's a really good point that you're making. I have to say, I see a lot of young women, who come to my office and they ask for, they kind of like explain how they're thinking about a conflict they're facing or a negotiation they're facing, and the underlying logic seems to be, I'm going to be a good girl and not ask for anything, and they will give it to me because I was a good girl. But the problem is, right, that works when you're a kid, and you have parents, but once you're an adult and you actually need to advocate for yourself, you can't really do that anymore. And you talk about a 17-year-old. I have a family member who is now, later in life, who provides a service like a training service. And she was sharing with me the exact same issue, that a client was kind of like canceling last minute several times in a row. And she just didn't know, she didn't want to create a conflict. And she was very, very nervous about all of this, because on the one hand, she knew that she needed to put a stop to it. And on the other hand, she just didn't know, she didn't know what the consequences would be. Right. So Moshe, what do you think? First of all, do you have something to say about gender and negotiation?
Oh, so well, first of all, never ask me if I have something to say about something, because I always have something to say about something. All right.
You're my kind of person. That's perfect.
The first thing that struck me, but from a comment you said long ago, is, the three of us teach negotiation. And one of the things about teaching negotiation is we do simulations, and then people see the results. So you get to see if you did well and you didn't do well. In real life, you don't, right? You come back from the dealership and you don't know if you did well or not. And that creates a lot of anxiety for people. So, in terms of the impact of gender, it's definitely there, and I think it's a matter of degree, because I think there's an element in a lot of people, men and women, of people pleasing and wanting to be liked and being afraid of what would happen if we offended. I think that's more socialized in women than in men, but that doesn't mean that men don't have the same thing, and that in some men it's just as extreme as you find it in women. I mean, this very thing happened to my son. He did a job and people didn't pay him, and he came to me and I said, I don't know what to do because I want them to hire me again and I still want them to pay me.
Yeah.
And then they paid him, but they didn't pay him the right amount, so he had to go back to them again and ask them to correct it. And I really, talked through the strategy of how to approach him in a way that would feel respectful to them and yet advocate for himself. So, I think that one of the things is that, people approach negotiations with a lot of fear, and I talk a lot about that in Collywobbles. And you can classify the fears, in my mind, into three general buckets. One is fear of tangible hurt. Something bad will actually happen. They won't hire me again. The second one is fear of relationship damage. They won't like me anymore. And humans are social, and we want to be liked, and we don't want to be pushed out of the herd. And we're afraid. I can't tell you how many people have told me, I want to ask my boss for a raise, but I'm afraid of damaging the relationship. And I got to tell you, if you can damage your relationship with your boss by asking for a raise, there is already a problem with that relationship. Right? Yeah. Our fear of damaging relationships is huge. The reality is you kind of have to be a jerk to damage relationships. So the probability of actually damaging relationships is a lot lower than our fears. And the third one is a fear of emotional pain, right? They're going to make me feel bad. They're going to make me cry. So if you look at how people approach negotiations, when they fear, either tangible hurt, relationship damage, or emotional pain, those things really hold them back. Now, I think where you see some gender differences is that the way women are socialized, and Suzanne, could correct me if I'm saying something wrong, is that relationship is much more emphasized. So that fear of relationship damage is much more pronounced for many women. And because of that, it causes them to hesitate or hold back, because the problem with fears aren't bad. Like, everybody has fears, right? Cats have fears. All creatures have fears. Fears are bad when they dominate and define our behavior. And in negotiations, the way I see fears playing out is, first of all, an avoidance. If there's something that I'm afraid might happen, I'm going to avoid the negotiation altogether. The second thing is, once I'm into it, I'm going to rush through it because I'm so uncomfortable the whole time. And the third is, I'm going to give away stuff just to appease the other party because I'm afraid of getting hurt. And when we start seeing those behaviors, either avoidance, rushing, or giving away stuff, that's an indication that maybe we're negotiating based on our fears, not based on a relationship, a conversation, or an opportunity. And I think you see that more with women. I think you see it with men also in different ways. But I think given that we're socialized differently, those things come out in different ways.
Yeah, go for it, Suzanne.
There was a study that was done some years ago. They gave equal, approximately, numbers of men and women metaphors to choose from when answering the question, what is negotiating like to you? And so for men, the typical, the top two answers that were selected by men were a wrestling match, or going to a ball game. Like, negotiating is like a wrestling match, and that's a good thing, right? It's like, come on, let's arm wrestle.
Yeah.
For women, the number one metaphor, and I don't recall how many were there to choose from, was like going to the dentist. So again, we don't have to keep apologizing that stereotypes are just that. They don't mean all men, all women. But here's the thing. If going to the dentist is something you don't want to do, you don't do it. And you don't do it long enough so that it becomes, we give it even more power over us. And in fact, Jan and I were having a conversation earlier this week. And I said, I don't know about you, but I noticed recently, last several years, sedation dentistry.
Yeah.
This is a thing, right? So you look surprised, Moshe. Sedation dentistry. For those people who have waited so many years such that there are multiple problems to address, and that fear or discomfort or worry is so great that the doctor / dentist provides a sedative prior to the work, and you could sleep through the whole thing. Let's take that example a step further. How many people who are fearful about negotiating would choose to, if they could, have a negotiation while they're sedated? Don't answer that question, but it's just like, it's kind of an interesting thing. And again, there's so much to unpack here. I'm not even sure where to begin.
No, but that's a really, really good point, which is that the portion of the negotiation that people are terrified about is the conversation. And a lot of times they don't realize, it's just a moment. It literally can be 3 minutes, 2 minutes. It doesn't have to be like 5 hours or something. And if you're prepared enough, like the preparation is not scary, but when people think negotiation, they don't include preparation. They just focus on, yeah, I'm going to have to like make my case. And because they don't know what to say or how to approach. And going back to what Moshe was saying, there's a lot of fears. And a lot of them are not based on reality. I think, and maybe we can talk about where these fears come from. I feel like, so sometimes people say, one of the biggest fears, and I don't know where my undergrads get that. I don't know. It's permeating society at some point, and every single undergrad has the deeply rooted belief that if they negotiate their salary, the offer is going to go away. Like they're just going to rescind the offer, and that's it. They're not going to have a job and all that kind of stuff. Where do you think this comes from? Because it's not real. Like it's not reality.
So I'm wondering, I'm happy to give you my thought on that, but Suzanne, feel free to jump in if you prefer.
Go for it.
So I think negotiation involves a lot of unknowns, right? You never know at the beginning how it's going to turn out. You never know what the other party is going to do. You never know what their attitude is, what their personality is, what their policies are. So you're negotiating in the unknown. And I think as humans, we have a huge fear of the unknown. I mean, if you think about why almost every kid in the world is afraid of the dark, it's because you can't see what's there. And what we can't see, we imagine. And we can imagine some pretty scary things, right? Kids are always imagining monsters under the bed, not puppies, right? So when we have a lot of unknowns, we start imagining what could happen, and we go to the scariest stuff. And what we imagine will happen is we ask for a raise, and the next thing we do is get ghosted, and they don't consider us anymore. We ask for a salary, for a higher salary in the negotiation, and they rescind the offer. I mean, that's the scariest possibility, and that's where our mind tends to go. And you're right, the reality of that is actually not consistent with that fear. But because it's so unknown, that causes us to go to the scary.
I think also this idea of the unknown is exacerbated by staying away from it. You have a fight with your partner, you have a disagreement with a roommate, all these different things. I've asked the same question in my class. How many of you, if you learned that your roommate, your partner, did something that was really upsetting to you, and how many of you relish the idea of coming home and having that conversation where you can get this out in the open? And you look around the room and there's maybe one hand. And by the way, go back to conflict in particular. Again, lots of research shows that conflict is not just a cognitive thing. It's a full body physiological experience. Our heart races, our blood pressure increases, our skin starts to sweat, sometimes our teeth clench. And so it's not just the fear of the unknown. Our whole body starts to react in such a way. And again, hot stove. Well, if that's how that feels, I'm going to stay away from that. How bad could it be? Let me just sweep this issue under the rug and it will resolve itself. And of course, that never happens. But I think, it's not just a cognitive fear. It's also, a physical manifestation of, I don't want to do this, which, as we all know, the more you do engage in that, And whether it's a simulation or with somebody that you're close to who can give you some feedback, the less that effect is going to be on your body.
This is extremely interesting, and I think it's so I think a lot about, this idea, Moshe and Suzanne, that you talked about the kid kind of like afraid of the dark, and under the bed there is like some sort of like monster. And the answer to that is like, parents give a teddy bear, and you're thinking like, if there is really a monster under the bed, like what is a teddy bear going to do anyway? But like the answer is still like for the kid to be like paralyzed in fear and not engage with it, and just basically kind of like not even put the feet under the bed, because you never know, it might catch you or something. So let's go back to the idea. And before you go, so I went to go get your book, Collywobbles. Really, really great book. And maybe we can talk a little bit later about the process you went through writing this book, because I think like a lot of people would be interested in that. But I highly encourage everybody to buy it. You have great reviews on Amazon. I mean, it's extremely successful. So something that, people really, really seem to find interesting is body language. And it's really something that I don't know very well. I don't teach body language very much, or I don't know if scientifically we can really detect, things with body language. But I do believe that, how you behave and how your body is during a negotiation does play a role. So what would you advise somebody in terms of body language, to behave during a negotiation? And maybe Moshe, you can go first.
So I'm gonna mostly defer to Suzanne on this, because I gotta tell you, I've got no body awareness. When I do yoga, I have to do it with a teacher, because I have no idea where my body parts are, and the teacher has to tell me where to put my knee and where to put my elbow, because otherwise I do things all wrong, and I can injure myself. So I think it does matter, but I'm like you in a sense, Jan, that I am not as aware enough of this as would benefit me. So there's these people who, can read clues, whether the person is lying to you or not. I can't do any of that stuff. And I don't. So because of that, I don't focus on it. I focus on listening. I focus on the conversation. You do look at things like, if you say something and the person flinches, you should be able to notice that. Or if the person shuts down and stops talking, there's things you can read. But in terms of being very deliberate with my body language, that kind of thing, I wish I were better at that, but I'm just not. And I just have to rely on other things. And I think that is a really good lesson for a lot of people, is do what works for you. Like, some people might be really good at being mindful about what their body's doing. That's not what I do. So I have to rely on other things, and I can be equally effective doing what works for me, whereas what works for you might be something completely different.
Excellent. Thank you, Moshe. Suzanne, what do you have to say about body language?
Well, first of all, it's not 100%, right?
Right.
If someone goes like this, it doesn't mean they're angry or defensive, right?
Their arms could be tired, right? Like they could just be resting their arms.
I wish my jacket had pockets in it, and it doesn't. So I got to put my arms somewhere. And so first of all, there's plenty of research that suggests the words are only about 7% of what we communicate, right? So one thing we might kind of earmark for later in our conversation is the role that all of this remote work that we're doing now, right? How that might help in some ways people who do get more riled up, if you will, during a negotiation. But the other thing that I would add to the lack of 100% accuracy of being able to read, no matter, you're an FBI informant or right, it is not 100% accurate. And then you start adding in cross-cultural differences and you're sunk. But what I would say is this: it's okay to ask. So if Moshe and I were negotiating and I noticed that he flinched, I could say something to the effect of, "Hey, Moshe, when I mentioned that, I noticed you shifted in your chair. Tell me what that's about." So I never presume to know what another person's intended or unintended body language may say, but I am willing to notice it and share, not in a judgmental way, like, "Oh, you're not listening to me," but rather, "I noticed X." I call it a perception check. What's that about? Or does that, is there something that I said that was unclear? Should I find another way of explaining it? So noticing it is not a bad thing, but thinking you know what it means and jumping to the, oh, well, that means that they're not listening or they're angry or I pissed them off. That's the bigger mistake is to presume. I like to just say, hey, I noticed you did X. Then sometimes they'll say to me, oh, I didn't even notice that I did shift. Fair enough.
This actually happened to me this morning. I had a meeting this morning at 10 to work on something with a colleague. And we get on the Zoom and I look at her and I say, something seems off to me. Yeah. And she said, I just got nailed with a huge deadline that I have to get something in today. And I was like, why don't we postpone this meeting to tomorrow? And there's the look of palpable relief on her face when I said that. But she would have soldiered through with the meeting because she might have felt uncomfortable to postpone our conversation. And I was happy that I was able to notice that. And, I didn't do any more than just say, hey, I'm noticing something. And that gave her the opening to then say what she needed. So, yeah. And I think any assumptions we make about that are more harmful than helpful. But especially just in a very open-ended way saying, hey, I'm seeing something I don't recognize, and giving the person the opening can be really helpful.
Yeah.
In fact, I'll also plug another book that's neither of ours called Crucial Conversations. It's a best-selling book. Millions have been sold. And there's a great phrase that I think about regularly that's used in the book. The story I'm telling myself.
Right.
The story I'm telling myself. Well, JN did this. The story I'm telling myself is, and we don't bother getting more information. We come to a conclusion with very little data and certainly no clarification. And so if you recognize that this is a human kind of behavior, right? Oh, the story I'm telling myself is he didn't call because he doesn't like me, or they're ghosting me because, and then you find out that some terrible accident happened in their family. But, to check yourself, where are those stories coming from? Do they follow these patterns of victim and villain and hero? And, where are they coming from? And how can you stop yourself from coming to a conclusion by just doing like what Moshe said?
This is extremely interesting. And like, as a personal anecdote of, kind of like jumping to conclusions that are wrong. It happened to me a couple of times where the very, very last session of the semester, we have 26 sessions or something, then I would have something would be canceled. And so I would end up with like an extra session. And I would always be thinking, I can't cancel the session because students are going to think I'm unprofessional. Like, they're going to think I'm trying to cut corners, or they're going to think, I want to get paid to do nothing or something like that. And so I've done, and it's crazy, but I've done like a vote. I would say to students, what do you want to do? Do you want to do a session on X, a session on Y, or do you want to cancel it? And every single time, everybody votes to cancel it, because it's finals, it's the finals period, and they're like drowning in work. And so they're just saying like, if we can cancel it, that would be great. So I really agree with you. I think, it's definitely something that happens a lot. I want to say we've received a few messages, very, very interesting messages. I'm going to try to feature some of it. If you want to participate or ask a question to Moshe or Suzanne, please post a comment or post in the chat and I will relay the question. But I think there was a very, very interesting comment by Sophia. I'll see if I can say it all, but also being advised by family and friends, don't do it. If you negotiate, things will get bad. You will lose the job offer. You will damage relationships. It's actually something I hear a lot. In a lot of times when students come to see me, it's because their family told them not to negotiate. And a lot of people told them like, you don't know what you're going against. They're going to rescind the offer. They're going to hate you. You're going to start your relationship on bad terms. And they want me to convince them they can go negotiate. How can we, if people are parents, for example, or family members, what's a good approach, with somebody who's asking you, what should I do? Moshe, do you want to go for it?
Yeah. So, in anything like this, first of all, I think the question to ask yourself is, what do I actually know? And the answer for most of us actually is not much.
Yeah.
Right? So am I giving advice based on something I know? Or am I giving advice based on my concern for the person and what I worry might happen, which is really driven by my own fears, nothing to do with them or their situation. And, you know, I think as parents, as friends, very often we impose our own narratives on the advice we give other people. So if
Yeah.
somebody comes to me for advice, the first thing I need to do is actually listen to them, listen to the situation as they describe them, ask them questions about the facts of what they actually know, and really be very mindful of what advice I'm giving and why I'm giving it. So, before, Suzanne, when you talked about narrative, about stories, so I'm really into this. This is like one of my favorite things in the world. Chapter 6 of Collywobbles is actually called "What's Your Story?" And it's all about narrative. It's my favorite chapter of the book. And a couple of important things is that when we negotiate, very often we have stories about ourselves, right? I'm new. I'm too young. We have stories about the other person, right? They're a jerk or they don't like me. And we have a story about the situation. Oh, this is a seller's market. I don't have a choice. I don't have a chance. And those stories have a huge impact on what we do, how we feel, and how we interact with other people. Not only that, we get stories implanted in our heads from before we're born. There are stories that people tell about us before we even come into the world. And then at a young age, those stories get fed to us. And then at some point, as we grow older, we internalize those stories, and we don't even need anybody to feed us those stories. We have our own versions of those stories in our minds, and we need to be thoughtful about what stories we want to keep and what stories we want to change. So I'll give you an example on this very quickly. So I was an engineer, and then I went to business school, and I discovered that I don't want to go into management. I don't want to stay in engineering, and I fell in love with mediation. And I told my parents that I'm gonna quit my job and open a mediation practice. And they were terrified. I had 2 kids at the time, and they were terrified for me. And nobody gave me the advice that it was a good idea to quit my stable engineering job and open this practice in this field they didn't understand. And yet all I could see was, this is what I love doing, and this is opportunity, and I'm going to figure out how to make this work. And it was the best thing I ever did. I mean, I've been doing what I've been doing for a long time. I love what I do. But I understand where their fears came from. They were concerned for me, and from their position as people who always had stable jobs in big organizations, I could understand their perspective of, you go out, do your own thing in the unknown like that, and that is, very perilous for your family. So I empathize with them. And you got to take that advice with a grain of salt, because you got to remember where it's coming from versus where you're coming from and what your circumstances are.
Well said. It's funny, when you told that story, Moshe, I was reminded, I'm a first gen, right? So my parents didn't go to college, and one barely got through high school. And when I announced after finishing my undergraduate degree that I was moving to LA to get an MBA, first words out of my mother's mouth were, "What for? You already have 1 degree. What do you need another one for?"
Women don't need more than 1 degree, silly women.
I mean, I don't know how much of that was gendered, but it was also her school of thought. And sure, there's probably an undertone of, when are you going to get married and have babies, right? Isn't that what women are supposed to do? Another thing I just wanted to comment briefly on, something you said, Moshe, which reminded me, my kids are now 29. I have twins, and I have a girl and a boy, which, by the way, made for great social science observations about those gender differences, but that's another time. And I think my relationship with my kids is very good, but it went from very good to excellent when I realized one thing, and that is, my doctor mom, let me fix that for you. Have you tried X? Did you do Y, etc., was not only not wanted, but it actually would push them away. And so I learned about maybe 6 or 7 years ago that when we would have a conversation and they would dump a story, this happened, that happened, etc., the most helpful thing that I could then respond with is, wow, that really sucks. I'm sorry that happened. What's the most helpful thing I can do for you right now?
Yeah, because sometimes people just need to vent. They
And
don't
they
want
would say that.
advice. Yeah,
They would say that. They would be, I just want you to listen, Mom.
and
You
that's
got
it.
it. So even before Moshe, the question asking, which I'm a big fan of, right? What are all the issues at stake, and what did you do, and what haven't you done, and what questions are great. But even questions can be, in a sense, you starting to solve the problem for them. And so when there is this difficult moment of this happened at work or this happened with my partner, I'm really sorry. How can I be the most helpful to you right now is a great way to kind of see if this is the moment that they want your advice or even want to try out some ideas as you're the sounding board. Just a couple of thoughts I
No, no,
thought I'd
no.
Yeah. I actually had the funny thing happen. It was the opposite way. So one of my sons had an issue and he came to me with it. And I just listened to him. And he said, I don't need you to listen to me. I need some advice. So got to be open to going in any direction.
No, no,
Well,
no.
and
Yeah, go
the
for it.
question opens the door, right? So there are times when my kids would say, yes, I want your advice, but I've stopped assuming that they want me to give them advice. I'm sorry, Jan.
No, 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 no. And it's really something I'm very sensitive about because I've had family members kind of like who they have an agenda for you. And so whenever like you ask them for advice, it's always going to be like a way for them to push that agenda of what you're supposed to do and who you're supposed to become. And it's really something that I consciously I'm very, very careful about with my students. When they ask me for advice, I really remove my opinion. I try to give them the best advice for them, not for what I think is the best from my perspective. But so something that I wanted to ask you guys about is, we had this really great comment from Sophia, who was saying, that sometimes your family members kind of like, they psych you out, they tell you like, be careful, you're going to get fired if you say something or that kind of stuff. In addition to this, I think sometimes organizations, and they do something that I call negotiation suppression, which is they have techniques that they don't do on purpose. I don't believe somebody said let's just on purpose prevent people from negotiating, but I do believe that HR people have learned over time how to phrase emails, how to approach candidates so that most of them, 80% of them, would not negotiate. And I've seen actually some techniques that go even beyond that, where you say, for example, I had a student last year who said to me, okay, well, I'm going to go to negotiate, and I kind of prepared her and all that stuff. She shows up to the office, and then it's just a secretary, and then she says, well, I was supposed to meet with that person to negotiate. And the secretary says, no, well, here's the contract. You can sign it. If you don't want to sign it, then, you can leave. And I guess they'll see what they do with you. Right. And so she signed the contract and was extremely upset by it. Very, very upset, because she felt that she had been tricked into accepting that contract, but she had already told her family that she had a job offer and all that stuff. They psyched her out. So what do you think of all of this, of kind of like these kind of like negotiation suppression things going on?
So, I think the part of it that's inadvertent is just people being people.
Yeah.
I think something like that doesn't sound inadvertent at all. Something like the story you just recounted, that sounds like an underhanded technique to get someone, to coerce someone into an agreement. And I'd really question whether she wants to work there at all. If that's how they treat people, better to find another job, maybe take the job until you find another one and ditch them after a few weeks. Because not that I suggest that to people much of the time, but
Right.
that's just really horrible. And, people shouldn't behave like that. And companies that do behave like that shouldn't get the best employees.
But we don't win by doing that. Oh, so sorry, Suzanne. But like, it's not a good idea. Like, that's what I don't understand, is why companies can end up doing that, when in reality, nobody wins. Like, who wants to trick somebody into accepting a contract? Suzanne, I'm so sorry I interrupted you.
No, that I was going to say that trend has been going on for at least a decade. More and more organizations have built into their employment contracts mediation or arbitration that you sign up to accept. That, you know, by accepting working for XYZ company, you recognize that we will enter into arbitration, and, you know, we will not go to court and all that kind of stuff. So that trend has already been happening. But the other thing that I was going to mention is that one of the things that I've been doing in the last 5 or 6 years, I developed a 3-day experiential, transformative program for women, and for women only. And the reason for that, aside from these gender differences, is that in a room with mixed gender, women are more likely to revert to their natural, more comfortable behaviors and stereotypes, expectations of them, than they would if they were in a room of all women. And I've seen this play out myself. I've done exec ed programs, you know, in a university, as well as specifically for organizations. And, you know, one of the things that I have noticed is that when it comes to salary and salary negotiation, the women going into the situation would be, of course, a little bit nervous, a little bit concerned, but they don't even realize that there is an opportunity. And so the companies that I work for will say things like, okay, I like the fact that you're going to do this program. This is great for our women. Oh, and it also checks that DEI box. This is great. But whatever you do, don't talk about salary negotiation. I kid you not. I've had this conversation so many times I've lost track. And I say, well, first of all, salary negotiation is one of thousands of negotiations that we have in our lifetime. And so I don't focus on that. But let me kind of present, going back to what example you gave earlier, Jan. Let me reframe this for you. Half of your workforce is women.
Yeah.
And if women are falling into this stereotype, and if not just their own fears and concerns, but the very real backlash that they and their female colleagues experience holds them back, you're preventing half of your workforce from pushing back on a vendor who says, sorry, I'm not going to be able to make that deadline for you. You're pushing back on the women who are told, no, this is not a negotiable offer, take it or leave it, and find out months later that their male counterparts are being paid $20,000 a year more, and then they leave. And then, of course, the cost of replacing them significantly outweighs the savings of paying. And I'm not saying companies are automatically paying women less, but there is definitely continuing to be a salary secrecy sort of culture in most organizations. So, it is kind of shocking to me that I get that statement. Glad to have you, but whatever you do, we don't want our women in this program coming back to us after this program asking for raises. Oh my God.
Go for it, Moshe.
I do say that, having done a lot of that stuff too, they don't want me to teach the dudes how to negotiate salary either. Yeah. They don't want any of their employees to negotiate salary. They're like, please, that is like kryptonite. Don't touch that subject. And of course, that's all the employees want to talk about.
Because knowledge is power, right? And so they're like, please don't give them knowledge. They're going to know how to negotiate. Interestingly, so I don't have employees, but just like you, I have tons of students. And when I started teaching negotiation at McGill, I was using I was based on a previous syllabus from other people. And it was kind of like a common sentence, almost like a joke, right? In the syllabus of saying like, you can negotiate everything in this class except for grades, right? And so I kind of like had that into the syllabus and didn't really believe, I didn't really know what to think about it. I was starting out and all that stuff. And then one day a student came to me and said, why can't we negotiate grades? And I thought, after all, why not? Like, if you have an issue with your grade, I realized at that point, I'm better off having a meeting with you if you think your grade is unfair, if you think you're unfairly treated. I'm better off having a meeting and a negotiation with you where I'm going to explain, why you have this grade, rather than kind of like having this blanket statement that prevents or shields me from any negative feedback. And I think it's the same thing for a lot of managers. I think, if you don't want people to negotiate their salary, okay, but what's the next thing they're going to do if they can't negotiate their salary? They're going to quit. They're going to undermine you. They're going to be upset. You know how bad it is to have a dissatisfied employee in your workforce that silently quits just because they want to readjust. Like they're saying, I'm not paid enough for this, so I'm just going to do like half of my work, right? Who won? Nobody won.
I have to ask, Jayan, so how many grades have you changed?
I actually, honestly, I don't change almost never. I really very, very rarely change the grades, because a lot of times, the student has developed a feeling that a grade is unfair, but they don't see what other people wrote. And so, sometimes I'm just here to explain. A lot of it is comparative grading. I'm here to explain, look, like this is what you wrote. This is what the expected level was. And so I think, students, there's like this very old research about how people are willing to accept, a negative outcome, but the process, that led to that outcome needs to be fair. And so as long as there is like procedural fairness, and they understand that this grade was comparative, I didn't perform as well as other people, I'm fine having a low grade. And so I really do a lot of work where, if somebody is dissatisfied, I'm really more than happy to meet them for like 20 minutes. We go over the essay, I explain what's wrong with it. And then I focus kind of like on the future, like how can you do better for the next one? But how do you guys do? Like, what's your policy about grade changes and that kind of stuff?
So you can start, Moshe.
I'm very much like you, Jan, in that I'm always open to the conversation. Generally, I try to be really careful in my grading, so it's very uncommon for me to change the grade. However, sometimes I did make a mistake. Sometimes I did misread something, or I missed something, and I dock them for not including something that they included in a way that I didn't notice. And in that case, I'll change the grade. If they make a good argument for it, and the evidence is that I made a mistake, I'll change it. But so I'm always open to the conversation, and the bar is pretty high for them to persuade me that there's a change that needs to be made.
It's funny because that's exactly what I tell students as well. I say, sure, we can negotiate, but you're going to have to convince me that you deserve a higher grade. So that's on you. So come prepared. Suzanne, go for it.
Honestly, I don't have much else to add to that. It's pretty much the same. But the last time I had an MBA student, ask me to change the grade, very quickly I realized that she was in danger of being kicked out of the program. And the other faculty member from whom she earned a low grade, which I think, lower than B- is problematic in a master's level course. Basically, it came out, well, that professor will change the grade. So I thought I'd ask you. And I'm like, well, looking at the grades, they're all in this C+, C+, B- area. So how you come to B+, other than please do me a favor, don't let me get kicked out of the program, that's not really a compelling negotiation. So it's like, good try.
So that's a good follow-up question for you guys. If you had to give advice to a student on how to negotiate a higher grade with a professor, what would you advise them to do? What's the best way to approach a professor?
I think, we've already said it. Number one, prepare, right? Look at what you've done, look at how it matches with the syllabus. I mean, more often than not, coming back to what we've said before, there is just this emotional response to, I thought I was an A student. How did I get this B? This sucks. But rather, in the process of, and I usually tell my students this, before you come see me, I want you to review your assignments, review the syllabus, review the rubric, and then come and talk to me. And 99 times out of 100, there's really nothing else to say. And yes, Moshe, I have made clerical errors in my grade sheets before. And if it's pointed out to me, I eat humble pie. But more often than not, it's like, you convince me on the basis of your having done the work and you believe that there is an error, and I'm happy to listen.
Yeah, the other thing I always encourage people to do, and this, by the way, is true both in grades and in salaries, is engage early. Don't wait until the done deal and then come back and try to renegotiate. If you have a concern going into an assignment, have that conversation ahead of time. Find out what help you can get. Find out what relief you can get in terms of deadlines. Find out how you can work as a partner with the other person to try to generate success. And don't wait until it's done. I had a colleague who was teaching undergrads, and the student got a C+. And he came to her after the grades were submitted, and he said, "What can I do to raise my grade to an A?" And she looked at him and she said, "Well, first invent time travel, then go back and do a better job on your assignments."
Yeah, no, I mean, I really agree with you guys. If I may add, like, another piece of advice for students is, don't pretend that you're doing this only for the learning opportunity and you don't care about the grade. Because, you know, a lot of them, they're like, no, I just want to learn. But they're just fighting you on the low grade part. Like, they're not discussing anything else. I think, you know, we know you want to have a high grade. It's completely valid, you know, that you think your grade is too low, but maybe don't misrepresent your intentions.
You know, speaking of preparation, I actually do this with my MBAs. I say to them, look, I know you care about grades. You have no idea how little I care about grades, but
Yep.
I know you care about grades. But I got my MBA back in 1995, and I graduated with high honors. And in the 28 years that have passed, not one person has asked me about my grades. Nobody cares. They care that you have those 3 letters after your name, MBA, and that you have it from a good school. That's all people care about. So, you know, yes, I'm going to try to be fair. I want you to try to do well, but don't stress this out so much. It doesn't matter enough. And people really need to have perspective about, you know, we look at our interests. You know, Suzanne, you mentioned we need to know what our goals are. We need to evaluate our own interests going into a negotiation and decide what are the things that we care about a lot and what are the things that we care about less and that we shouldn't emphasize or should have in our hand to trade away for the things we care about more. Because prioritization is so important, and the grades just really don't matter that much, especially for the undergrads, yes, but for the MBAs, not so much.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Moshe. Back to the piece that I wrote for HBR 21, the first step that was 2 steps behind preparation was recognize. Right? Recognize, is it fair? You know, is there a better deal, et cetera? But the second step is evaluate, exactly to your point. So even if you recognize an opportunity to negotiate, it may not be worth your time. It may not be worth the emotional toil. It may not, I mean, I will admit this publicly. I don't know why, but maybe, you know, years of living in a different financial situation, I will drive another half a mile to save 3 cents a gallon. I don't know why. I mean, I've finally gotten better at this. So it's like, at the end of the day, 3 cents a gallon of gas on a full tank of gas is not even enough for a latte. And by the way, I do like lattes. So, you know, that kind of negotiation, like having this conversation will end up with another $5 in my pocket kind of thing, is really not worth it. But if the kind of opportunity you've identified, a longstanding conflict with your partner, your roommate, or a longstanding lack of parity in pay between you and other people you're doing as much, if not more and better work on, that is worth your time and attention. And even if it's fearsome, even if it's difficult, even if it's going to take you hours or days to prepare, that's worth your energy.
That's a really powerful statement. So I have another question for you guys, which is, sometimes negotiations can become emotional and they can become heated. What are your tips for people who sense that there is some sort of an escalation going on and they want to manage their emotions during a negotiation? What would you advise them to do? Maybe Moshe, do you want to go for it?
So I kind of said at the beginning, is the most important thing is to slow down. Emotions aren't bad, right? Humans are emotional, and I think negotiations are much more of an emotional process than a rational process. And if you've read Thinking Fast and Slow, we're not that rational. We're mostly intuitive and emotional. So our thinking part of the brain tends to be a little slower than our emotional part, and that's why we tend to get reactive. And when I'm getting emotional, like if I'm negotiating, like, my biggest negotiations happen at home. I've been married for a really long time, and nobody can push my buttons as much as Barbara can, and I can push her buttons better than anybody else can. I've raised 6 teenagers.
Oh, wow.
A lot of emotion, right? And the thing is that you have to constantly manage your emotions and slow down. And I really became cognizant of this when I became a mediator. So a long time ago, when I was in business school, I took a negotiation class, and the reason I took it is because I considered myself to be a bad negotiator. And it turns out I wasn't. I had really good skills, but I had a lot of challenges negotiating, and mostly because I would get very wrapped up in my own emotions as I negotiated. So then I became a mediator, and I discovered that I'm a really good mediator. And I started asking myself, why is it so much easier for me to mediate than to negotiate for myself? And the big difference was I wasn't in the equation. When I'm a mediator, I'm not involved, so I can focus on the process. When I'm a negotiator, when I'm negotiating and trying to advocate for myself, all of a sudden I'm in the thick of it, and it's much more of an emotional process. So it's not that I didn't have the skills, it's that other things got in the way. And learning how to manage my emotions became really important. A lot of times people say, oh, let's leave our emotions at the door. I don't know how to do that. I tell them to stay at the door. They keep coming in. I'm a very emotional, volatile person. And what I've learned is that I need to manage them in real time. And the way I manage them is to slow down, breathe. If I find myself triggered by something in a negotiation, which happens all the time, to sort of watch those physical clues. Suzanne, you mentioned those before, right? Notice when my breathing has changed, or when my muscles have tensed, or my heart rate has gone up. And then use various techniques to slow myself down, to stay silent, to ask questions and listen instead of responding to what the other person said, to take notes because I can't write as fast as I talk, to call for a break, right? Some of the most effective words for a negotiator is thank you, let me get back to you, because I'm in no mental shape to respond right now. So to really recognize that emotions aren't bad, they're just there. And what you want them to still be there, but not to run the show. So you need to slow yourself down so the rest of your brain has time to catch up.
That's
Moshe, fantastic advice. There's one little addendum and then another thing that I'll mention to that, but superb advice. And where you just mentioned it toward the very end of your answer, I was going to mention this idea of a timeout or a break. And we forget about it, right? Because this is like this escalation of conflict, and you kind of like, I have to have the last word. But to simply say, I need a bathroom break. Who's going to argue with you? Right? Or, hey, what do you say we take a moment and grab a coffee? And so anything like that, I think, is a great way to not just slow down, but just to pause. And I find when I go to the bathroom, whether I have to or not, we all have our trusty smartphones, right? And so I could check my notes. I could do a quick check on what the latest, stock market number is on this company, anything and everything. So whether it's, ideally, obviously, it's another day. But even if this negotiation is scheduled for an hour and 20 minutes in, you're kind of like, oh my God, taking that break gives you a chance to breathe, to do a quick meditation, to check your phone, to do anything, and to therefore find a way to kind of put some space in and allow yourself to recognize, get back into your head as opposed into, the physiological changes that are having in your body. And that's really important. Can I also say one more thing before I forget?
Of course.
So when I'm teaching first day in a class or an executive program, I'll start off with a simple, what is negotiation? And there's some sort of two basic definitions about goods and services and bargaining and exchange and all that stuff. But my third bullet is that it's voluntary, that negotiation is voluntary. And what I mean by that is what happens sometimes is we get, jumped on. We're like, oh, Moshe, that thing that happened with that client, we need to talk.
Yeah.
And we feel, we're blindsided like that. And we feel like we have no choice but to respond. But actually, that's not true. Most of the time, we're able to say something like, I completely agree. We do need to talk. How's Thursday at 1?
Extremely powerful statement. I was giving a talk for a professional organization a few months ago, and something that was extremely interesting to me was several of the people who were there professionals. Several of these professionals were telling me, oh, I've never negotiated my salary. I always get caught off guard. Like, the boss shows up and says, your evaluation is in 10 minutes. Come to my office. And they just show up and they're not prepared or anything. And I say, why don't you refuse? Why don't you say, no, we can't have my work evaluation in 10 minutes. We need like 2 days so that I can prepare. But I think, it's in the interest of the boss there, right, to like pressure you into accepting it. Something that I really agree with what you guys have been saying about taking a timeout. It reminds me, it's something I was talking about 2 weeks ago, but in a past life, I used to be a summer camp counselor in Maine, and I was a summer camp director, and I was director of boys and discipline. And so you imagine, right, that 400 kids, 400, that was crazy. So out of these 400 kids, you have several kids who, when you're the director of discipline, they make it their mission to like get under your skin. Like, for them, you're like, you become like, the adult, and you're like the person to challenge. And one of the things that the owner of the camp had taught me at the time, and it really stuck with me, it's to use time to my advantage. So for example, if it comes on my radar that a kid again did something that was not supposed to be done, and I need to go there and punish the kid or something, if I feel myself emotional, I would have the kid wait in my office for like an hour, and I would just go somewhere else and do something else, and then I would come back in the office. And during that hour, so not only my emotions have come down because I've done other things and all that stuff, but also the kid doesn't know what happened during that hour. I might as well be packing his stuff. I could be calling his parents and all that kind of stuff. So sometimes just using time really, really has helped me in the past.
I want to challenge us, because right. I would get this question. Okay, that sounds great, but what if the person says, no, I want to solve this now. I can't come back next week. My flight's in, 2 hours. How would you respond to that?
Moshe, do you want to?
So one way to respond to that is, if you absolutely need the answer now, here's my position, accept it.
Yeah.
Right? If you need the answer now, give me what I want. If you want to talk about something that works for both of us, it needs to be a longer conversation.
I'd be worried if somebody said that. I'd be worried that they would be too emotional and too driven by something, that would kind of like make the negotiation derail. So I guess I would challenge the fact that we really have to talk right now. In the professional organization I was talking about, it was kind of like the same, like, they had to like fill out these forms right away and all that stuff. But in reality, you don't have to do it right away. You can take a few days. So I would really not run with it. I guess I would challenge it. But it's a very good point. How would you deal with it, Suzanne?
I mean, first thing I might say, if it was that, deadline, can you tell me a little bit more about what's driving this deadline?
Yeah.
It might be out of their hands, to be fair. Like, they may be a messenger sent by the organization to take care of this thing. I find that empathy works well too. gee, this is a really important decision. Put yourself in my shoes. How would you feel if this decision, which can impact essentially, the next 5 or 10 years of your life, you were made to decide on the spot? And the last thing I might say is, I think of negotiation not as a trip to the dentist or a wrestling match, but a collaborative problem-solving conversation. And it's in both of our best interests to come prepared with not only ideas about what we want, but also what are ideas that would serve the greater good? What if we're working for the same company, or if we're working in the same industry, or, if we're both women, or if we're both, whatever. And so I often tell my students after, first class, where we've done preparation, created a strategic outline, and done a negotiation, I tell them, and often to like big wide open eyes, I want you to take this outline and share it with your partner, roommate, parent, etc. There's nothing better in a negotiation than all parties being fully prepared. You don't win because you're prepared and they're not, because if you do win, and you've created resentment on their part, or a feeling of unfairness, how is that? That's a small win in the moment, but actually over time, that deal could unravel. Or if it doesn't unravel, you could go back to what Moshe said earlier, you could really damage the relationship. So, having all parties as prepared as possible is best for everyone.
I would go even further with that. I'd say if this is happening to you, it's because some things that should have happened before that didn't happen. Right. People ask me, when's the best time to negotiate, my 2024 salary review? And I'm like, today.
Yeah.
Start having that conversation with your boss now, saying, hey, I know you're going to do my review in November, and I know that that's when the salary, here's where I'm hoping to get. And I want to work with you to understand what I need to do, what performance metrics I need to meet, what projects I need to take on, what skills do I need to learn to get there. And it's not a one-time conversation you have in January. You revisit this throughout the year so that by the time November comes, there should be very few surprises. And if your boss still decides to ambush you like that, start looking for a new boss, because that's not a healthy relationship. But for most people, that's not the experience. Your boss is your partner. Your boss succeeds when you succeed, and your boss will be very happy to work with you throughout the year. It's what happens is people wait too long because they're uncomfortable to have these conversations, and then they get surprised in November, and now they don't know how to respond. We can prevent a lot of that by having these conversations gradually over a long time and really treating the other person as a partner. We need to stop treating our managers as enemies. No boss wants to be the boss of the most poorly paid group in the company, right? We're not at cross purposes as much as we imagine ourselves to be. And it's we're afraid to have those conversations. And very often, by the way, our boss is equally uncomfortable to have those conversations. So we might actually need to help them just turn this into just conversation. A lot of times when I'm teaching mediators or I'm teaching negotiators, I'm like, stop thinking of this as a mediation. Stop thinking of this as a negotiation. This is a conversation. And you've had conversations since you were 2 years old. You're just having a conversation with a purpose to it, but it's still just a conversation. And you know how to do that. And you can take the heat down on how intense this is for you because it's just conversation.
Really very, very interesting. And I think an underlying theme in what you both said is the idea that you can start the conversation by appealing to overarching goals and then explain, because I feel like sometimes, people, they kind of like narrow their focus on, raise or salary negotiation, but they don't realize, so it looks like my interests are opposite to yours, because we're negotiating a salary. But if you take one step back, you can say that me accepting a lower salary than what I want is in nobody's interest. Nobody wins if you trick me into signing a piece of paperwork. You're just kicking the can down the road. And so it's actually something that was explained to me by my PhD advisor when I was starting at McGill, where I didn't want to teach a class, but they were kind of like pressuring me to teach a class. And then she said I had to be gracious about it, but I can also explain that my goal as a professor is to make sure that I can push my research agenda forward, that teaching this class, that this is why I was hired, that teaching this class will actually go against, kind of like this goal. Moshe, I have a question for you. As a mediation professional and mediation trainer, I think a lot of people, they know two people who don't get along, or they know two colleagues who don't speak to one another. If somebody wants to try to mediate a conflict between two people, what would be your advice to them?
First of all, be really careful, because you don't want to be in a position where you intervene and neither party wants you to.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. And secondly, focus on listening. Right? Very often, just by listening to each party, you can help them clarify for themselves what's truly important for them in this situation, and they can take it the rest of the way themselves. I would say, try to do the least amount possible. Try to be, the least intrusive that you can into their conflict. That's going to, first of all, create a higher likelihood that your own relationship with them will survive and thrive from the situation. And secondly, it'll empower them to resolve the issue themselves, which is really much more powerful than you doing it for them. But a lot of times when people are in conflict, when I'm in conflict, I'm not clear in my own thoughts. I'm not clear in what I'm feeling. I'm not clear what I want. I'm not clear what success looks like. And having someone actually ask questions and listen to me helps clarify things in my own mind that then makes me more capable of having a different conversation with the other party. So if one piece of advice is focus on listening, focus on helping each party on their own be clear on what it is that they are looking for, what success looks like, what they want to communicate to the other party, and then try to, as much as possible, let them take it the rest of the way themselves.
Excellent. Thank you. Suzanne, do you have a piece of advice?
One of the things that I've had conversations with people about is this, throwing up their hands and they're impossible, or I can't talk to them, or and maybe
they're crazy. Like, I hear that they're crazy. Yeah.
Well, let's not get into mental health at the moment.
Yeah.
Let's just park that. But one of the things that I can sometimes get people out of that mode with is, if somebody could wave a magic wand and the situation improved, it was more comfortable, it was more friendly, it was more whatever, what would that look like? Give me that future state. And I know, Moshe, you said, oh, sometimes I don't know what I want, but I kind of depersonalize it by saying, well, what would that look like if or little Harry Potter, ding, what would that look like? And then I might ask, what are some of the possible ways of getting that? I mean, at first I would ask, is that impossible? You already came up with the idea, right? So the fact that you came up with it makes it real that this is a possible state. Oh, well, that was a magic wand. No. It's those hypotheticals that sometimes get people out of that one track thinking. And so, well, if money were no object, if time were no object, if my status in the company were higher, whatever that is, you can tinker with those criteria. But once you get to that, what is that magic state? Well, what are some of the things that would have to happen? Not even you, but what are the things that would have to happen in order to realize that vision? And it's not 100%. I'm not going to, pretend that it is, but it's a good starting point to kind of just get past that, stuckness.
Excellent. Thank you. So I wanted to play the Master Negotiators game. I don't know if you've seen, it's something that I use to start conversations about negotiations. And so it's a card game where I pick basically a negotiation, a setting and a piece of information about the relationship. And then we think about what would be a good strategy on how to deal with it. I think something that a lot of managers are struggling with and have been struggling with over the past 2 years is the idea of letting employees work from home or letting their team work from home. And it creates a lot of stress, a lot of difficult conversations. So what if you're a manager and you need to negotiate, they want to work from home part of the week? It's a video call, and as a piece of information about the relationship, the other party often over promises but sometimes under delivers. What would you advise for a manager? How do you negotiate a work from home schedule with a subordinate?
Should I jump in?
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that I find works well in situations like that is a trial run, right? That if we experiment, let's do this for 2 weeks. You know, here's what are some of the parameters I can tinker with. Let's try this out for 2 weeks. And if X, Y, and Z parameters meet this standard, can we extend the experiment for another 2 weeks? I find that, you know, putting it in that field test or experiment mindset takes a little bit of the pressure off, like this is going to be the way it is from now on, and creates a little bit more flexibility for trying it.
Excellent. Thank you. Moshe, do you have a piece of advice?
So first of all, Suzanne, I think that was brilliant.
Yeah.
And I think that if we are negotiating a permanent solution, the stakes are super high. If we're negotiating a trial run, that gives us the opportunity to be a lot more creative and to take more risk. And so I think that's brilliant. I would also focus on interests and objective criteria. So what is important to me about you and your work and the relationship with the company? So there's some parameters, right? There is getting the work done. There is communicating with the other members of the team. There is our ability to interact informally with each other or to have spontaneous conversations. And to frame things in terms of those interests, we want to find an arrangement that will make sure that you get your work done, that you get the information you need from me, that you're having the kind of conversations you need to have with your colleagues, that you're available to your colleagues when they need you, that some spontaneity and informal idea generation happens. And, rather than say, oh, how about 2 days? And they'll say, how about 3 days? That's a very positional conversation, but to really focus that on interests and then to attach metrics to those. How will we know that we've actually achieved those things? And how will we measure it? And when will we come back and evaluate how it's going? So I like the trial run, but to attach those interests and metrics to it actually gives us a sense at the end of the trial run to say, okay, what's working? What do we need to adjust? And how do we go forward?
That's really, really powerful. Thank you. And so we're reaching pretty close to the end of the episode. So I have one last question to each of you. And so Moshe, I'll go with you first. I think a lot of people are afraid of being nervous in a negotiation. Are there a situation where being nervous can actually help you?
So I find that in my situation, I need to be a little bit nervous to be on top of my game.
Right.
Because I also get kind of complacent, or I don't notice what I need to notice, or I don't prepare enough. Being a little nervous is actually really healthy. Being nervous means that I'm going to keep I'm going to stay on my toes. I'm going to make sure I'm prepared. I'm going to make sure I slept well before the negotiation. I'm going to make sure that, I've prepared myself, both emotionally and physically for the negotiations. I think being nervous to a certain degree is healthy. When you see that, your emotions have gotten to the point where you either can't think straight or can't think at all, that's when it's a problem. So yeah, absolutely. Being nervous is good. Being nervous is, I love being a little nervous. I'm a very avid kayaker, and sometimes we do things that are a little bit dangerous, and a little bit dangerous is fine. Too dangerous, and I might die.
So what you're saying, it's funny because it reminds me, and I don't remember who that actress was, but there was this story, and I think it's back in France from when I was in France, where basically you have like a young actress is telling, kind of like is saying, "Oh, I'm not nervous when I'm acting. Like, acting doesn't make me nervous." And the older actress said, "Well, it's because it comes with talent." Right. And so it's kind of like a diss, but it's pretty normal to be nervous. It's something that's expected. And you said something that I feel is very powerful, which is like emotions are not our enemy. They're here for a reason. And if you feel stress and nervousness, it's because there's a lot at stake, but it's fine to live with that nervousness.
So long as it doesn't go to the point where it paralyzes you or
Exactly.
causes you to do things that are counterproductive.
And so, Suzanne, I have a question for you. And I don't know if you have one in mind. I haven't asked you this before, but do you have a negotiation strategy that seems counterintuitive, but works well? Something that, something that people maybe might be thinking, well, I'm not sure if I should do that. But in your experience, it actually works pretty well.
I'm racking my brain. Can I change the question?
Yeah, of course. Another question that I have is what is one quick exercise to boost confidence right before a negotiation? If you're nervous about a negotiation, you're about to get into the office, what do you do to boost your confidence?
Well, actually, one of the first pieces that I wrote about gender and negotiation was a 2018 Harvard Business Review digital article. And one of the things we talk about in that article is the importance of positive emotion. And the idea that you put yourself in a positive mindset by recalling a really positive memory. Or thinking back on a time when something really good happened and kind of wash yourself with that positive mindset. Doing that not only enables you to come in with a bit more confidence, but it also enables more creativity. And isn't that what we want in a negotiation, right? You come with your ideas, I come with mine, but the more that we can kind of like build off each other and create something new that neither of us thought about first is really, the win-win that we all speak about, that synergy. So that is one of the things is, just mindfulness, like, being aware of your body, but also this positive emotion.
Excellent. Thank you. So we reached the end of the show. Thank you so much for making time for me. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. Please, if you're watching this, go follow them on LinkedIn, Moshe and Suzanne. Go buy Collywobbles, Moshe's book on Amazon. Great book. Go on Harvard Business Review and read the pieces that Suzanne has written. I will see you in the next episode, next week with our next two guests. Thank you so much, you guys. I'll see you soon. Have a good one.
Thank you so much, Jan. Thank you for inviting us. And Suzanne, it was delightful to have this conversation with you as well.
Same, Moshe. And thanks again, Jan.
Thank you. Have a good one. Bye-bye.